Hello, my YouTube channel subscribers to Big Bill Anderson's Death Tours. I am here at Evergreen Cemetery in Tucson, Arizona, and it is a beautiful day. Got a lot of adventures ahead of me today, but for right now, I wanted to pay my respects to this lady right here. You talk about a true Western pioneer, a real heroine of the Old West. This lady right here, Larcena Pennington Page. In 1860, she was abducted by Tonto Apaches. And while she was on a trail, being taken back to their village, she wasn't keeping up with the rest of the abductees, I guess, and they decided to kill her. So they stabbed her. Before, they ripped all her clothes off, and then they stabbed her 18 times with spears, and then went on about their way. Well, this lady was not dead. She crawled for 18 days back to some form of civilization and found help. And the first thing she said when she reached her help was, "Give me a chew of tobacco." So you talk about real old school pioneer ladies. But she went on to live another over 50 years, mothered several children, and I'm going to tell you her whole story. It's really fascinating. It's one that I couldn't pass by when I researched and found out about this lady in Tucson. I definitely had to stop by. So I hope you enjoy the video, my friends. Thank you.
Larcena Pennington Page was born January 10, 1837 in Nashville, Tennessee. In 1857, with the promise of economic prosperity, Larcena, her parents, her brothers and sisters traveled west, originally with the intention of settling in California. They headed west with 3 wagons pulled by oxen and mules, and a herd of cattle. The wagon train forded the Pecos River, where several of the cows drowned, then continued on to Paso del Norte. From there they followed the Rio Grande west towards Tucson. They passed through several canyons where Apache Indians were known to spring surprise attacks. In June of 1857, the Penningtons temporarily stopped at Fort Buchanan in southern Arizona. Because their animals were either exhausted or had been stolen by Apaches, Larcena had contracted malaria also. The men obtained a contract from the government to supply the fort with hay, and the women sewed soldiers' uniforms. When they completed the contract, the Penningtons moved west along the Santa Cruz River. While at Fort Buchanan, Larcena met lumberjack John Hempstead Page and fell in love. The two were married on December 24th, 1859, becoming the first American citizens to be wed in Tucson, Arizona, which at the time was populated by less than 1,000 people. After they married, Larcena moved from the fort to Tucson, but her husband John remained at Canoa Ranch. The ranch was owned by Bill Kirkland, and John lived there because it was only 13 miles west from Madera Canyon and the Santa Rita Mountains. John and his partner William Randall had a small lumber mill at Madera Canyon, where they felled pine trees and transported them to Tucson by wagon. 23-year-old Larcena was employed as a teacher for Kirkland's 10-year-old ward, Mercedes. Eventually, Larcena moved to Canoa Ranch with Mercedes, but she soon became ill, possibly with malaria. John decided to move his wife and Mercedes out of the desert and into a cabin near Big Rock at the lumber mill. He thought that the higher elevation would help Larcena recover. On March 15th, 1860, John and Randall arrived in a wagon to pick up Larcena, Mercedes, and their dog for the trip to the cabin. They had nearly made it to their destination when it was decided to stop and rest for the night. Unknown to them, 5 Pinal Apaches were watching the camp from concealed positions in the surrounding hills. The next morning, Randall went out to hunt for breakfast, and at around 10 a.m., John went up the canyon to check on a load of lumber at the mill. This left Larcena and Mercedes alone at camp. Larcena was sitting on a rocking chair in her tent when the dog began to bark. Then suddenly she heard Mercedes scream. The Apaches captured Mercedes, and when they opened the flap of the tent, Larcena grabbed her husband's revolver, but they took it from her before she could shoot. The Apaches were armed with lances and bows. 4 were younger men, but the 5th was older and spoke a little Spanish. The older Apache told Spanish-speaking Mercedes that he had killed John, and when she told Larcena her husband was dead, she started to scream. One of the Apaches put his lance to Larcena's chest and threatened to kill her if she didn't stop. After stealing whatever they could and cutting open the pages' sacks of food, the Apaches took the 2 women northeast, roughly along the base of the Santa Rita Mountains, toward one of their strongholds along the San Pedro River. They stopped a short distance from the camp because the Apaches wanted to tear apart a feather bed they had been trying to carry off. One of the Apaches talked about how all the land in the area was once part of their domain until the white man came. The journey to the Apache camp was rough. During the walk, both Larcena and Mercedes tore off pieces of their clothing and bent twigs to make an easily recognizable trail. One of the Apaches melted snow in his hands for the captives to drink. Larcena was pushed or pulled up steep places in the trail, and Mercedes was carried on the back of one of the Apaches. John, who was not dead, returned to the camp and discovered that his wife and Mercedes were gone. John assumed that the Apaches were responsible, so he got a few men from the mill to help, and they followed their trail. Just before sunset, when the group was about 15 miles from the camp, one of the Apaches ran up and told the older Apache that people were approaching from behind. The Apache quickened their pace, but Larcena could not keep up. She had walked all day and already was weak from her illness. While the group was standing atop a ridge, the Apaches made Larcena take off her corset and skirt, and as she turned around to continue walking, one of the natives stuck her in the back with a lance. She fell over the side of the ridge about 17 feet until becoming lodged against a pine tree. The Apaches followed Larcena down the ridge, thrusting their spears into her over and over, throwing rocks at her. The rocks hit Larcena in the face while she was up against the tree, and she fell unconscious. The Apaches dragged her body into a snowbank behind a tree so she could not be visible from the trail. They removed her boots, and one of them put them on. Larcena woke up a short time later and could hear her husband's voice coming from the trail. She tried to call him, but it was too weak to speak loud enough. Because one of the Apaches was wearing Larcena's boots, John passed right by his wife without ever knowing she was there, and followed the Apache trail all over several mountains. When John could not find his wife, he went to Tucson and recruited a posse for a second attempt at finding her. After John passed by Larcena, she fell unconscious again and remained in the snowbank for about 3 days before waking up in the middle of the night. First she ate some snow and looked after her wounds, for she had been bruised with stones and cuts with 18 lance wounds in her back and arm. Then Larcena went further down the ridge and fell asleep until sunrise. Because of her wounds and loss of blood, Larcena could barely stand, so for the next several days she crawled the 15 miles back to camp, surviving on seeds, herbage, and wild onions, with snow water to drink. Night by night, unable to lie on her back because of her wounds, she crouched upon her knees and arms on the ground and dreamed of food. But when in her sleep she reached out for the pot of beans before her, she awoke to find her hands clutching only gravel. One day Larcena came across a bear's nest and wanted to sleep there, but she knew it was a bad idea, and that idea went away. 10 days after her terrible journey began, she climbed to the top of a ridge and saw the road that heads to Madera Canyon and the camp. Hearing the sound of voices and wagon wheels, Larcena attached her petticoat to a stick to signal for help. She also screamed, but the people in the wagon passing by without seeing her or hearing anything just kept going. When Larcena reached the camp 2 days later, she found a smoldering campfire, some flour, and some coffee that was still on the ground from where the Apaches cut open the sacks of food. Using water from a nearby stream and a piece of her clothing, Larcena prepared some bread on the fire, made some coffee, and then rested for the night. On the next morning, March 31st, Larcena followed the road east to the lumber mill. As she crawled closer, she was seen, but at first not recognized. With clotted hair and gaping wounds, nearly naked, emaciated, and burned red by the sun, she was at first mistaken for an uncomfortable outcast squaw, and the men ran for their guns. It was only when Larcena called out her name she was recognized. But even then, one man insisted that she was a ghost because he couldn't believe that a 23-year-old woman could survive so long under such trying circumstances. One of the men took Larcena into a building and had her fed and washed while another man went to get a doctor in Tucson and informed John, who was preparing for a third expedition to find his wife. Larcena asked if anyone could spare some chewing tobacco. She was then taken to Tucson, where she fully recovered under the care of a doctor. Several days later, Mercedes was found by the United States Army and traded for Apache prisoners at Fort Buchanan. She later married Charles A. Schibel, a man that I'm doing a video on also, and had 4 children, but died at the age of 26. In 1861, the American Civil War was about to begin, and Larcena was worried that the Apaches would turn more violent with the absence of military personnel. Larcena and her family soon moved to Patagonia, Arizona. Cochise and Mangus Colorados were attacking American settlements all across southern Arizona and the Mexican territory. In March or April of 1861, her husband John was ambushed and killed by Apaches north of Tucson while transporting a wagon load of goods to Camp Grant. John was buried where he died at the top of a hill. In September of 1861, Larcena gave birth to her daughter, Mary Ann, and shortly thereafter she moved again to Tubac, Arizona, and later to a stone house about a half a mile away from the international border with Mexico. The stone house was located in a dangerous area frequented by Apaches, and at one point Larcena had to flee to Maury, a small fortified mining town. Constantly moving, by April of 1864, the Penningtons had returned to Tubac and were its only residents, as everyone else had fled during the Apache attack in 1861. Larcena's youngest brother carried guns to protect the family from further attacks. In 1867, Larcena's sister died of malaria, and in 1868, her brother Jim Pennington was killed during attacks against the Apaches. In June of 1869, her father and another brother were both murdered while working at a farm by Apaches. The remaining members of the Pennington family left for Tucson, then decided to move to California. Larcena and her brother were the only two remaining family members in Arizona. Jack decided to move to Texas. Larcena decided to remain in Tucson. In August of 1870, she married William Fisher Scott, a Scottish lawyer and judge. Larcena and William had two children, William P., born September of 1871, and Georgie Hazel, born October 6th of 1872. Larcena refused to leave Arizona despite all the hardships she went through there. She became a Christian and was one of the first members of the Congregational Church of Tucson. She was also named president of the Arizona Historical Society. Larcena lived a relatively quiet life from there until her death on March 31st, 1913, at the age of 76. Pennington Street in downtown Tucson is named after Larcena Pennington and her family. Scott Avenue is named for her second husband, William F. Scott. So, my friends, I love history of the Old West, and this lady, Larcena Pennington Page, was a true testament to the toughness, tenacity, and the will to survive in the western frontier. These pioneers had grit. So I hope you enjoyed this very long video, and please like, subscribe to my channel, ring the notification bell, share the video, and I have a lot more adventures ahead. Thank you very much, and have a beautiful day, my friends.